I'm sorry not to be able to be with you tonight.
What would you like for Christmas, Stanley?
A fortune computer.
Why do you want a fortune?
Because it has the best chip architecture, the most advanced operating system.
What's that?
It's called Unix.
And even there were times where it was very difficult during the making of the movie. Times where, the characters are at odds, and all of these raw, emotions are there, and you can't, when you're in the middle of a scene, especially the way Stanley's working and the way I work, you don't just fire it off and go, okay, honey, what do you think? You're respectful and disciplined about it, but it does invade your life.
The tea break at 4. You don't have to break for this tea break. This must just be a complimentary tea break. If you broke for tea at 4, you don't have to break for tea at 6, at 6:45, then break for a meal at 7:30. So figure it out.
3 shakes. This is my gun. No, in time to the thing. This is my rifle. This is my gun. This is for fighting. This is for fun. So give it 3, because a lot of people just still touch and go with what they're doing.
Anyone who has ever been privileged to direct a film also knows that although it can be like trying to write War and Peace in a bumper car in an amusement park, when you finally get it right, there are not many joys in life that can equal the feeling.
Director's Cut. Today we're talking about one of the most influential and legendary directors ever, and that is Stanley Kubrick. My name's John, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jason Alt.
Hey, everybody.
What's up, Jay?
Oh, just chilling. Cracking a beer here.
Nice.
We're doing this.
We'll get to that beer in a sec, or our special guest in a second. But before that, we actually have another special guest today, a very special guest today, and that is actress, model, Crohn's disease activist, also fellow movie reviewer, Lindsay Washburn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So what made you want to come on a Stanley Kubrick show?
Well, I've always liked Stanley Kubrick, more so the man than some of his films. But always there's a lot of information to talk about when you're talking about Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so we could kind of go around the horn. This is not a dry show. We are going to partake a little tonight talking about the Kubrick. Jason, why don't you start us out? What do you got going on?
From Arcadia Ales in Kalamazoo / Battle Creek, Michigan, I have Apollyon, which is a 9.3% golden ale. It's a summertime brew. Still pretty good, but they're fire sailing it because it's getting into wintertime when we want to be drinking some stouter stuff, and it's still good. I'm cleaning out my beer fridge. I bought a lot of it, and tastes real good. And 9% is real warm going down, so it's perfect for late fall, early winter.
That's a blonde?
There's a golden.
Golden. Let's see that. Put that in the camera.
All right. Let's get that right in the camera for you.
Oh,
Looks like
right.
It means business, doesn't it?
It really does.
Nice.
Lindsay, do you have a special guest tonight?
Sorta. Like I said, I drink like a 17-year-old girl. This is Cherry McGillicuddy's and Red Bull. It's like grown-up Kool-Aid. I love it.
That is rough stuff, my friend.
Medium shelf.
Yikes. That's bottom corner. But hey, I mean, whatever works. I have a Storm Surge from Diamond Knot Brewing. This is a winter ale. It's only a 5.5%er, so you guys are going to get more tanked than I am. But I don't know. It just looks kind of...
Are you holding that really close to the camera, or is that
It
like
looks
a
enormous.
pint?
It's a bomber.
Oh, well, it's 5.5%. I'm drinking a 12-ouncer. I think we're going to be tied.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this looks like one of Kubrick's little shorts, the Seafarers. So I'm like, hey, got to stay on theme. So here we
I
go.
couldn't tell if it was Kubrickian, like you put it close to the camera so it would look huge in 1 point perspective, or if it was actually just a giant beer. And it turns out
a beer, not a phallus, right?
That's right.
I guess a beer bottle is kind of phallus shaped.
Sorta.
If we're just gonna be honest. Yeah, this looks like gonna be good. That's way too much foam, but I pour beer like a 17-year-old girl, so it's okay. So let's dive right into it. If you don't know who Stanley Kubrick is, I mean, audience, then you probably should. If you don't know which movies he directed, that is why I'm here. I will kind of run down the entire filmography quickly, just to kind of set the stage. So here we go. Kubrick officially made his let's try that again. Take two. Kubrick officially made his directorial debut in 1951 with the boxing documentary short Day of the Fight. It chronicled the preparation and actual bout featuring twins Walter Cartier and Vincent Cartier. In the same year, Kubrick released another 9-minute short documentary, The Flying Padre. His first feature was anti-war film Fear and Desire, released in 1953. Kubrick despised this film, calling it a bumbling amateur film exercise. That year, after his first feature bombed financially, he had to take a paying job shooting his third short documentary, The Seafarers, like my beer. With the money he made from the Seafarers Union, he then went on to direct crime noir Killer's Kiss in 1955. Kubrick would stay in genre in 1956 with Lionel White's novel adaptation of Clean Break with the release of The Killing. A year later, in 1957, Stanley Kubrick would hook up with star Kirk Douglas for the first time with Paths of Glory. Kubrick would also meet his wife, Christiane, during the production of this film. Disappointed and impatient with industry success, he would take on the monumental task of epic historical drama Spartacus in 1960. Although he directed the film, Kirk Douglas was given the final say granted by the studios over most decisions. After becoming disillusioned with shooting films in Hollywood, Kubrick would pack up his family and move to England. His first film there was another novel adaptation of Lolita. This movie was released in 1962. Next up was Kubrick's 1964's political satire black comedy Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Against Kubrick's wishes, British star Peter Sellers was cast in 3 roles, although the studio insisted on 4. In 1968, Stanley Kubrick would produce and direct science fiction epic 2001: A Space Odyssey. This would be his only personal Oscar win for Best Visual Effects. 3 years after, in 1971, Stanley would jump back into the director's chair with the dystopian crime film A Clockwork Orange, which would be met with such media outrage. The film would be pulled from British theaters until 2001, 2 years after Kubrick's death. Period drama Barry Lyndon would be released in 1975, which took 2 years to shoot. During this time, Kubrick would withdraw production and his family from Ireland due to death threats he was receiving, still concerning A Clockwork Orange. Taking 5 years off in 1980, Kubrick would come back with a bang with Stephen King film adaptation The Shining. 7 years after that, he would return for critically acclaimed war movie 1987's Full Metal Jacket, starring Matthew Modine and Vincent D'Onofrio. After trying to develop failed projects, including a biohistorical Napoleon film and Holocaust period piece, Kubrick would release his final movie in 1999 with Eyes Wide Shut, an erotic thriller starring then-married couple Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. Kubrick would unfortunately pass away shortly after these films' release. So that is I think it's only 13 films, and some of them being shorts. Lindsay, what was your kind of introduction to Stanley Kubrick, and which film kind of really stuck out to you?
Well, the first Kubrick film that I ever saw was The Shining. I think that's a lot of people's first kind of step into Kubrick. And just the images and stuff of that film as a kid really, really stick with you, I think. And after that, I went into like Full Metal Jacket, Clockwork Orange. I read the novel of that as well. And most of what drew me to Kubrick is just the different subject matter that he chooses to tackle, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Jay, was that? I think my first movie from him was The Shining, also, or it might have actually. I might have done Full Metal Jacket, then The Shining. What was your first?
2001. It's my dad's favorite movie, so I sat down and tried to watch it with him. I was probably too young to sit and watch a Kubrick movie because they're boring. And 2001's boring, and if you've never seen a movie like that, you know, if it's the 1970s and you're a teenager and, you know, you see some shit like that, it's probably mind-blowing. But, like, I'd seen Star Wars, so I was like, it's kind of boring. I gave it another chance. It's a good movie. I like it now. But even adults will go see Kubrick and they'll leave the theater like, I didn't like that, and then they'll watch the movie again later. You know, like Spielberg didn't like 2001 the first time he saw it, and that's Spielberg. So, you know, that guy's the biggest Kubrick fan in the universe. So,
really
yeah, I would say, but then like I kind of got into like when I was like 16, 17, my parents had the good cable package, and I was like, what movies should I be watching? So I would just like go online and find these lists, and I was like, oh, Full Metal Jacket, that's a movie I'm supposed to watch. And I liked it, but didn't get it. And now I feel like I get it and like it. So that's good. And then I just kind of saw the rest. I feel like I saw Eyes Wide Shut like the year it came out on Cinemax, stuff like that. So I saw AI in theaters. I guess that's the only Kubrick movie I saw in theaters.
AI?
AI, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a movie he tried to get made for 30 years. So, yeah, I kind of, you know, I everyone knew Shining references, so like it was part of the zeitgeist, but I didn't see it until I was in my 20s. I feel like the second time I saw The Shining, I was in a drug tent at Bonnaroo, just getting out of the sun because I was way too drunk. And I was like, oh, I think I'm starting to get why this movie's unsettling to people.
The first time I saw anything about The Shining was when I saw Twister in the movie theaters.
Oh, yes, when it comes tearing through the drive-in screen.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there is something to be said about that. And I dove. So, and this is what kind of the show is about, is diving into the actual person and the film, of course, but
yes,
the actual person and how he relates or he or she relates to making art and all that. And I really dived deep into it to the point where I couldn't watch any more like documentaries about him because I was feeling like sad because he was such a polarizing force.
Yes, very much so.
It's crazy. Like he basically had a family business going on. Like he would make his like nephews and stuff like do the catering. You know, they would be. It was just a very insular thing, and he was just like one of the only people that had the clout to be like, screw how the Hollywood like machine is done. I'm taking everything and I'm going to build everything in England. And you know, Warner Brothers is like, yeah.
Has there ever been any other director that's had that kind of relationship with a studio where he pretty much could do whatever he wanted?
If what he wants is to make one movie every 7 years, fronting the cost for all the pre-production himself, then yeah, I guess, you know, anybody could do that if they were so inclined.
True.
But I think about it, like there's like prophetic directors that just kind of churn, right? There's your Tim Burtons of the world that just like have a new thing every year. But he couldn't make a film unless he felt like he could become obsessed with it. And that's kind of later on, because at first he was just making schlock. I mean, he was just making anything for a paycheck. And even Spartacus, I think he accidentally made a masterpiece.
Well, that was true. Like I listened to an interview he did on the set of Full Metal Jacket, and he was just talking, and he said he got started by his friend was making these documentaries, and he said like they were getting 40 grand for a documentary. He's like, 40 grand, we could make a documentary for 5 grand. So they made it, you know, and they fronted all the costs and everything, and they tried to sell it, and everyone's like, we'll give you $1,500. He's like, well, I thought this company was getting 40 grand. It's like, that company went out of business. So he learned the hard way, but he still's like, we can make cheap documentaries. You know, we can do all this stuff ourselves. We can learn how to teach ourselves stuff. We can make these documentaries cheap. And it wasn't until like the third one that he even turned a profit, you know? Yeah. So he put himself through a film school just by, honestly, it's almost like it was another get rich quick scheme for him, which is funny. It's like, this is way better than playing chess in the park for quarters.
Right.
So he quit a really lucrative job as a still photographer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah, his work for Look magazine was pretty amazing.
For as young as he was, yeah.
Yeah.
He had a really good eye. And he was all self-taught too, which is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's very like when he would do interviews because he hated the media, despised the media because he just felt, even though on all the people that were close to him said that he was extremely funny, and he was just kind of a joy, but he was like the kind of funny where he would invite you over to his house and just like have a family game night, but he was very uncomfortable in his own skin out in the public. And he was like, think about celebrities now. It's like, that's what everyone wants to do. Everyone wants the fame, wants the money, the recognition for the name and the art, but he didn't want any, he wanted to be able to go to the grocery store still.
Yeah.
Well, I think people thought he was a misanthrope just because he just shied away from the media. It's not that he didn't like people. He liked people, which is why he chose to move to a small town where he would be surrounded by people he liked. The fact that he didn't give interviews made the media think he was hostile to them, when in reaction he was indifferent. That's one of the best Kubrick quotes ever, right? The most terrifying thing about the universe is not that it's hostile, but that it's indifferent. And that's why the media was terrified by him. He wasn't hostile. He was just indifferent.
Yeah, there were just all these crazy stories about him, like shooting people on his lawn and then paying them off and stuff like that. And I think that just kind of contributed to this larger than life figure that he eventually became.
Well, it's possible a film like Clockwork Orange might have been better received if he had done a little bit of media support for it rather than just foisting it onto a public that clearly wasn't ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, he was just like he was like a cat person. Like he was you'd walk in his house and there'd just be animals all over the place. He was so particular. There was
Plus he's like, if a cat was a person, that would be Kubrick, right?
Yeah. Oh my God.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pretty much though, right? Like, yeah, it's just like he wants the fame and affection, but on his terms. And but one of my favorite stories, and this was coming from a documentary that I watched, was from S for Stanley, his relationship with Emilio D'Alessandro, who was this, I think he is an Italian, at the time he was an Italian cab driver, and he was hired by the production company during A Clockwork Orange to deliver the giant phallus. And, he went from that to becoming Stanley's driver, to then becoming like a stagehand. He appeared as the news guy, as the news little kiosk worker in Eyes Wide Shut. But he almost, like everyone around Stanley Kubrick, he was very stressed out. And Emilio's wife even was just like, he calls you constantly. He's so particular. You got to get away from him. They even had to move a couple times, but then Emilio would always go back to work with him, because even though how abrasive Stanley Kubrick was a lot of the time to the people closest to him, especially his actors, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but there was this crazy magnetic draw to someone like just this interesting, I guess. I don't know what it was.
I'm sure he treated his driver better than he treated actors. I'm sure he didn't make his driver drive him to the set 127 times. Just to see if the 127 times surprised him.
Right.
Well, I mean, he made the guy fly back several times a day, taking props back and forth and making sure stuff got to the set all right, and all these handwritten notes for him. And didn't at one point he like piped a direct phone line into the guy's house?
Yes.
So he could get a hold of him whenever he wanted without his wife making a stink about it.
He had a Kubrick phone, and every time he's like, I'm quitting. I think at one point, like Emilio's parents were passing away, and he gave him like a couple months, or his son. Oh, his son got into like because Emilio was a Formula One racer also, and then I guess his son started doing that too. He got injured, and I think he had his leg amputated, to where Kubrick was even like, yeah, take some time off. And then it was like a week later, he wrote him another letter. He's like, okay, I need you back now. It's just like, but the guy was like, yeah, of course. Okay.
Yeah,
let's do it. It was this weird, like everyone around him had this strange obsession. And even those actors, Malcolm McDowell would go on to say, like, he felt like he was his best friend while they were shooting. And then after A Clockwork Orange wrapped, he basically severed all contact with them.
Yeah. Because it wasn't, and then the ping pong story about he only paid him for half of the voiceover work because the rest was just ping pong.
Oh, I don't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, they would. He would go to his house to record the voiceover for Clockwork Orange, and they'd get restless, or their legs would start to hurt, so they'd get up and play ping pong with each other. and Stanley could never beat him. And then a few months later, his agent called and said, hey, you haven't been paid for that 2 weeks of voiceover work. So he called Stanley and said, hey, I haven't been paid. And he's like, well, a week of that was ping pong, so I'll pay you for a week.
Ass. Yeah. But I mean, we could talk a little bit about, treatment of actors. And I think most famously, the most mistreated person was probably poor Shelley Duvall in The Shining. She was losing hair. And
no question about it. He's like, I need you to cry for 12 hours a day. So I'm going to give you something to fucking cry about.
Right?
She already has unnaturally large eyeballs too. Oh.
It's a lot of surface area to keep moist.
She needed the apparatus that they use for Alex. And
yes.
Yeah.
But he was, I think that was part of what got him some of those better performances. He knew what to do off screen to get those performances on screen. It's like, okay, if I need to terrorize you, I need to be your best friend, or I need to tell you this, or put you in that situation. So
if you trusted or respected actors, you wouldn't need to do that. That's the thing. He's like, no respect. He's like, I'm going to make you do 127 takes until you forget your acting. And then you he was so careful and meticulous with the actors he picked. He's like, this is the perfect person. I need to have this person. But then he's like, oh, you think you know how to act? No, I'm just going to scream in your face until you cry for 12 hours. And like that acting, we're going to do 195 takes. I think 127 is the world record, right? With that stupid baseball bat scene. They did 127 takes.
So
something like that. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, he would
got the shot. He used the third one. Did 127 takes and he used the third one, something like that, something silly.
But they made poor, Danny and Scatman Crothers do that damn kitchen table scene something like over 100 times too. Like, yeah. You imagine that, especially with a childhood actor and this elderly gentleman.
Oh my gosh.
And because the kids can only act a certain number of hours a day, so it's like, well, we have 6 hours today. That was all we did was just shoot this. We can't get it. No wonder he couldn't finish a movie in under 58 weeks.
Barry Lyndon took 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
And we just
well, he was on the lam in Ireland. I'm sure he was just on vacation. He's like Adam Sandler's like, I don't think we can rap blended too. We're gonna need Hawaii for 6 more months. Adam Sandler, yeah. Maybe some of that was just like he'd not want to go back to England where his house was being picketed.
Talk about a film that took two years to shoot. It almost took me 2 years to watch Barry Lyndon because that is a slog. But again, that to your point, Jason, it's like one of those movies that I could see if I ever, for whatever reason, something terrible happens to me, I wind up in a hospital and Barry Lyndon's playing, I probably would enjoy watching it even more the second time because there is so much richness. Everything.
Why do you have to be in a hospital in this scenario?
Because he can't get away.
Yeah, I got to be strapped down to watch Barry Lyndon again.
Like in a Clockwork Orange scenario where they toothpick my eyes open.
Yeah, I mean, did you enjoy Barry Lyndon the first time?
I feel like I've only seen it once for 7 hours. I don't know. I couldn't make myself watch it a second time for this show. I realized that I should have been more prepared, but I just couldn't do it. I went back and watched Lolita instead.
That's probably the right choice. Have you seen Barry Lyndon somewhat recently, Lindsay?
Yes, I actually just watched it the other day, and I enjoyed it. I hadn't watched it.
You're a professional. Look at you.
I hadn't watched it in some years, and I mean more than just the visual aspects of it. I get drawn more into the characters and things like that, and just kind of how passive Barry Lyndon's character was and how he just kind of stumbled from one instance to the next, and you could never really tell where the story was going. And so I think that's what kind of kept me focused on the story and on the film.
The thing was with that character is like he went from like almost sympathetic, although he's kind of a prick during the entire thing. Like once you see the whole package and you see it from afar, you're like, God, I can't believe I was rooting for this guy at all. He's just a horrible con artist. He's a creeper. He's trying to like creep on his own cousin. I guess that was more, okay back in the day. But I mean, he's just like, at first I'm like, man, this guy is just like in a personal hell where he can't escape. Like he's very passionate. He wants this woman. He can't have her. Then he finds he gets highway robbed and all his money's gone. And then, he winds up against his will in the military, and he just, it's like a nightmare you can't wake up from. But then towards the end of it, it's like, God, I wish you die of syphilis. Like he's just the worst person ever. And that's what Stanley Kubrick did with a lot of his main characters, is he made pricks. And, and at the end of it, you're like, flawed. Yeah, but
it's like I don't want to care about you, but for some reason I slightly care about what happens to you.
Because you spend so much time with them as your POV character.
I feel like he made the same movie. He never made the same movie, but he made the same movie.
Just in different genres.
He was different genres for the same story, which is people never change. There's no character arc. It's a character circle. It's like in Lolita where they're driving down the road and the odometer flips over. It's like, oh, look, we drove 100,000 miles and here we are right back where we started. I feel like he doesn't think people change, or didn't think people change. And I think he contrived that to the extent that he would heavily modify the books that he drew from. He's like, 9/10 of this story is the point I'm trying to make. Like,
For a lot of his films, it's like the characters just do a 360, completely turn around in a circle. I mean, they have revelations and they go on a journey, but as far as personally, there's no interchange within them.
Because I feel like movies are 3 acts and books are 4 sometimes. So what he did with the Clockwork Orange is he cut out the epilogue. The epilogue of Clockwork Orange, the whole point, the reason it's called a Clockwork Orange is you can't artificially add something mechanical or monkey with something organic. That's the whole point. There's no such thing as a clockwork. It's the saying they use in the UK is, we say queer's a $3 bill. They say queer's a Clockwork Orange sometimes. I guess I can't verify that. That's just the narrative. And the whole point of a Clockwork Orange is that you can't have something mechanical that's also organic. You can't mechanically force somebody to be good. So the whole point of the first 3 acts of the book was, he's a piece of garbage. Now he's caught. Now they make him be good, but they can't, so they put him back. And then the end of the book, he's free to go be a piece of garbage again. And he runs into his buddy, Dim, who's a cop now. And he's like, not like an awful cop. And no, it wasn't Dim. He ran into one of his other friends that wasn't in the movie after that. And his friend's like, oh yeah, I'm married. I have, a wife now. I got a regular job. I'm just like, I settled down. I'm not a teenage piece of garbage anymore. I'm just like, I'm a person now. And like, that was the point of the book, was like, maybe Alex will settle down when he gets older. That's the point. And then Kubrick just left that out. He's like, people don't change on their own. This is BS. So he left out the most important part of the book. And then when they released the book in the US, they just left out that epilogue.
Yeah.
Anything that wasn't in the movie, they left out of the book, and then they're teaching that book in schools without the most important part of it. So like, that kind of ticked me off. He basically threw away the whole payoff of the novel just to fit the narrative that he had going in, which is, there are no character arcs, only character circles. People never change. And I don't know, that kind of ticked me off, because I feel like he kind of took a bunch of other stories and like modified them until they fit that narrative that he had going in. So it's no wonder people think he's a grump and a misanthrope when he like has such a low opinion of humanity in general.
Well, this is the same kind of thing that we were talking about off air about The Shining, where I've seen The Shining a million times, but just rewatching it for this, with this kind of a lens, I was just like, I really wish that he would have. I totally get where Stephen King was coming from, because he took the character of Jack and made him unlikable from the very beginning. Where when he had the turn in the film, you didn't care, because it's just like he was a dick the whole time. Like, of course,
Mhm.
if anyone's going to chop up their family, it's going to be this guy. But in the book, that it made it that much more heartbreaking because Jack was a loving father, kind of a loving husband.
He broke his kid's arm. That wasn't in the movie, I don't think, but that was in the book.
It was.
They allude to it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, but yeah, he was an alcoholic. He wasn't perfect, but he was definitely more likable and more sympathetic than he was. I mean, Jack Nicholson is just being slimy Jack Nicholson in the entire film. And you're just like, yeah, he's a villain from the very beginning. There's no
he goes from bad to worse.
Yeah.
Like the whole
He
point.
was really good at it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's just that's. Yeah, Kubrick liked to play with that. He liked to test the electric fences, so to speak. Like he wanted to make that fast motion sex scene in A Clockwork Orange like 20 something minutes, and someone's just like, no, stop with your audience. Like, just make your film.
Well, did you ever see that documentary Room 237 about all the conspiracy theories around?
Yeah, that I had to watch that a second time to prep for this, but the first time I got halfway through and turned it off just because everybody was just so in love with
yeah,
and
and
sniffing their own farts hard.
Big time. And I think the biggest thing is just like you said, Stanley Kubrick just liked to fuck with his audience a lot.
Yeah, because he could. Because who's going to argue it when you're the person that influences Steven Spielberg? Who's going to tell you no?
Right.
I don't know.
Oh, you think I faked the moon landing? Well, here's a bunch of Easter eggs for you dipshits.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just like he very carefully arranged the Calumet baking powder tins to show that the Indian was crying because this movie is about Native American burial grounds. And I'm just like, Jesus.
Oh, God.
Because I love when anytime someone dissects some shit to death, they're like teaching Fahrenheit 451. They're like, and this is about censorship. And then Ray Bradbury's like, no, it's about how people watch TV and don't read books anymore. And they're like, no, it's the firemen destroying books or destroying literature because it's censorship. He's like, no, it's about how people don't watch TV. They read books. I wrote the book. It's my book. I'm telling you what it is. They're like, quiet, Bradbury. We know what it was. I read the book. So some of the time is people that have too much time to watch it's 237,000 miles to the moon, and that's why it's room 230.
Yeah.
238,000 miles to the moon. Okay, close, whatever. Sure, that's not a coincidence. So he put in some stuff to screw with people for sure, but they're like, he's such a meticulous director. He would tilt the cans of baking powder, and it's like, calm down. Maybe he did, but like it doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means.
They made a few good points. I mean, just with like the construction of the hotel and how windows were to the outside when they shouldn't be. I think that was some valid points. Just with him trying to set the mood, for the film where it's very disorienting and things like that. But then they did too deep a dive and there was no coming back.
Well, like we said, you wouldn't have noticed.
Yeah,
you're like,
true.
That floor plan's impossible. And I'm like, he built a set.
Yeah.
They would go in. This was their off days when they had shoots. They would go in. They're just the production designer, everyone, and just kind of the crew, not with the actors, and just kind of check it out, like for a whole day. And kind of check out everything and rearrange stuff and set up lighting. Even though, the guy that played Barry Lyndon and blanking, something O'Donnell. He looks like Chris O'Donnell.
Oh, it's Ryan O'Neal.
Ryan O'Neal.
Yeah.
Thank you. Not
Love
O'Donnell
story.
All
Irish people look the same to you. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying he looks like Chris O'Donnell from Batman and Robin.
He actually does. Yeah.
But they would go in and they would block all the lighting. They'd set everything up. They'd rearrange props and everything. And then when the actors would come in, he would have to relight everything because, of course, there would be people there, and he wouldn't use stand-ins.
No,
because he said that that's not the actual person.
Stand there. He's like, yeah. Well. Come on.
I can't imagine.
Yeah,
I mean, some of his eccentricities were fun. It's like, oh, he built a model, and he would put a camera on a periscope inside the model and take pictures and plan his shots. I'm like, that's
awesome.
fun. He's like, one time he made Jack Nicholson stand for 17 hours while he set up lights. It's like, go fuck yourself. What?
The cool thing about Kubrick, though, is that we've talked about a lot of directors at this point, and we've talked about people like Michael Mann, and we've talked about people like David Fincher that make those kind of movies. They make, but he, like you guys said, he tasted the buffet table, and he did everything. He did satire, he did horror, he loved the war genre, of course.
Yes.
But I mean, and like you said, Jason, they were all kind of blood relatives of each other. You knew it was still a Kubrick film, but he would still kind of test himself. I mean, he made arguably one of the best science fiction movies of all time. That's pretty incredible to be
Which
able
was
to...
What You Love Will Betray You in Space.
Right.
Yeah.
And Eyes Wide Shut was What You Love Will Betray You at a Weird Orgy.
Watching Eyes Wide Shut recently, I'm like, I had an epiphany. I'm like, this is Barry Lyndon, the sequel. Tom Cruise.
A little bit, yeah.
He's just trying so hard to be skeevy, and like everything gets in his way. There's just like roadblock after roadblock, and it's
because he's bored.
Yeah, but he's shitty at it. He's shitty at being bad.
It's just like a bored rich asshole that like. It's almost like a Coen Brothers farce where he just tries to suck everybody into his. But like everybody was inclined to screw with him. That was the weird thing. It's like we already have the infrastructure to screw with this guy in place. What if we just did that? It's weird. I liked Eyes Wide Shut. I feel like I didn't necessarily get what he was going for, but there's stuff to like in that movie.
There's a lot of, relationships between men and women, and then class structure and stuff like that. And it almost seems like throughout the film, Tom Cruise is just getting emasculated over and over and over again in all these different ways. Financially, sexually, emotionally, just it keeps happening to him.
Well, he's trying to get revenge on his wife for almost cheating on him. So he almost has a good time.
Yeah. And almost gets AIDS. So
that's true. Eyes Wide Shut is if Stanley Kubrick directed a Red Shoe Diaries a little bit.
Bit.
It does belong on
What if he's like a Dear Penthouse letter and missed the point?
Yeah.
Well,
Dear Penthouse, one time my wife and I were talking dirty and she told me about her fantasies. Oh, so what did you do? Oh, let me tell you. Sit yourself down. Well, first I went to a weird... Yeah, I went all around New York City looking for a costume at 3 a.m.
I was just wondering if during that orgy scene, if they did any of those takes like 100 times.
Oh! That had to have been raw. Yeah.
I know you're wearing a mask and no one can see your face, but you're supposed to be crying, so no nipple salve for you.
But then you like one of my favorite scenes in a Stanley Kubrick film, and this is everything, is in that film, and it's that one scene where Cruise goes home and she's having the dream, and then she wakes up, and you could see there's the whole room is, and we're going to talk about lighting now. This is a good segue to talk about Kubrick's lighting, but the whole room is set in a blue hue because it's 4 in the morning, and for some reason it's like blue and kind of morning-ish. But except for the hallway has an orange to it. And they leave it, and I'm just like, that's kind of weird that he wouldn't have kind of turned that off. But as she's, once she's kind of awake and they're talking about the dream, and she's telling her husband how many, men she just slept with in her dream, you see him getting upset, and the half of his face is lit in that orange where I might be reading too much into this, but it looked like it was kind of rage. And the more and more she told him, you see that orange fade until his face is full blue. And she just completely, like you said, Lindsay, demasculates him. And I can't say that's
which way was the can of Calumet baking powder facing?
That's the answer right there. That's the key to it.
No, I bought in too.
Any guy that would spend 14 hours making Nicole Kidman sit there in her underwear so he could light her properly would have done that on purpose with the lighting.
He gets a pass.
Yeah, and going further with the lighting, I think it's directly after that where he's like, I'll tell you everything. And then it cuts to her crying in the living room. And it's just that stark, ugly morning light, which we haven't really seen before in the film. So it's almost like, okay, the spell is broken. You know, we're in reality right now.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he would light everything naturally, which is just crazy. Like that's why it took, you know, a whole day of just setting up lighting just to spend another day with lighting it with the actors in the room. And that kind of meticulous stuff would kind of, I think that's kind of the payoff though, where yes, he is a madman, but the audience gets to kind of transform it, or you know, I don't know, I'm losing the word, but kind of gets to put themselves into these realistic scenarios in these kind of fantastical worlds, which is pretty great.
And that's, I think, the biggest thing that I liked about Barry Lyndon was all the natural light and the candlelight. And he used those rear projection cameras that just make it look like, you know, all those old paintings. And almost every frame of that film is a moving painting. Exactly. Yeah. It's just gorgeous.
He used a lot of wider lenses in that. He used lenses that were so wide. The scenes of Barry Lyndon that were lit by candle, people couldn't move.
Yeah. Yes.
God, it just sounded awful.
Wasn't it a lens that was originally designed by like NASA, and they had to like retrofit it to those cameras that he got?
I don't know if it was that scene in particular, but that was a thing from that movie.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wasn't completely sure.
He was very scientific with lens work, and he would just walk around all day with the viewfinder. One of his signature shots, which you could see in A Day of the Fight, you could see in Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, and A Clockwork Orange, is that from the, you know, laying down upwards shot that you could see of, you know, like Jack pounding on the door, screaming at Shelley Duvall.
It's Tarantino's car trunk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that, I mean, can we say he originated this?
I mean, probably not. There's no way that anybody in the 1970s invented a new thing. Like it seems like everything, like in the first few years of cinematography, they would have tried that. So I'm sure he's not the first person to like film somebody from underneath that person, but he knew how to make you feel unsettled.
Yeah, the different camera angles he would use and extreme close-ups and things like that more conveyed emotion through those angles, and it just enhanced the performances.
So Jack Torrance is in the freezer, locked in there, pounding on the door, being shot from underneath, so he looks 30 feet tall. He looks like your giant beer from the beginning of this podcast. And Shelley Duvall is outside the door. She's on the floor, and she's being shot from above. It makes it look like he's looming over her like 10 feet taller than her, even though he's trapped. Like that kind of stuff. You know, my favorite quote from the movie Lolita was, "I wonder if the symbolism wasn't a bit heavy-handed at times." And I kind of feel like that was a little bit. Does he know?
I think he's in on the joke.
Fidelio, Latin for fidelity. You fucking hack.
Yeah,
all
right.
No,
well, because I can't remember who said it, but someone asked him, you know, how he was or how he was doing, and his stock response was, "I'm still fooling him."
Yeah.
Nice. He was the 1950s Nicholas Winding Refn.
He said, "I never learned anything at all in school, and I didn't read a book for pleasure until I was 19. And I was like, "Go fuck yourself."
We always say how we're trying to cut down the swearing.
I was worried about that because I'm a notorious F-bomb dropper.
No, this show is
it's too late. I don't know how else to express myself. Like, it's good that he made a lot of good movies, but also, did you have to? Are you telling me that you couldn't have been Abraham Lincoln without sleeping on a straw mattress, you dick? Like, calm down. It didn't take you 7 years to make a movie. Like, other people make good movies too, right?
But I think for him, it was more about not exactly control, but just
Well,
he wanted to be involved with every single aspect of what was going on. And when you delegate those things, you can speed up the process.
Sure.
But when he's looking over everything and making every single decision, it's going to take that long.
When he has to wait on he had to wait for Isaac Asimov to write a book so he could deliberately change the tone of the screenplay. Can you write a book so I could ignore it? Thanks.
Yeah.
Like, that takes time. Someone's got to write a whole novel for you to disregard. Like, you can't rush those things.
I like how you just openly talk shit about, like, the things that he had to do while he was doing them too. Like, you know, the reason that he even got Spartacus, which was kind of the turning point. Like, if Spartacus didn't happen, think about it, he probably would have been relegated to just do these little tiny doc shorts. And Kirk Douglas is just like, hey, you're my guy, but I'm the guy. Like, this is not a Stanley Kubrick film. This is a Kirk Douglas film.
Oh, it was Kirk Douglas's tombstone. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure. But Stanley Kubrick just like went on record after that and just completely just said, this is not my film. This is a paycheck. I hated everything about it. I hated my first feature film. I hate Stephen King, even though he would call Stephen King in like the middle of the night to talk about philosophy, and then the next day he would say how much of a hack he was.
Yeah.
Like, it's just crazy.
Why did people think he was misanthropic?
He's had a very, very twisted sense of humor.
Yeah. I mean,
very twisted.
Well, the reason I even watched Eyes Wide Shut, it was in 1999. I was making a collage. I had to make a collage for an assignment, and I read an article in a magazine, and instead of tearing it out and making the collage, I actually read this article when I was supposed to be collaging, and it was I forget, I should have looked this up before this. It was someone who was just talking about Kubrick and his life with him and like how he was dealing with his recent death. And he said one time he was out with Kubrick for like a week or something like that. And then Kubrick's like, oh yeah, by the way, you left a can of tuna on your kitchen counter in your apartment. The guy goes, what? And he goes upstairs and there's a can of tuna on his counter. And he found out
Neil Breen.
He found out after he died, the doorman's like, yeah, that Kubrick guy died. And he's like, yeah. He's like, that was a nice man. One time he called me and told me he'd give me $100 if I went into your apartment and put a can of tuna on the counter. And he never paid me.
Yeah.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
it sums him up great. That's who it was.
That's Matthew Modine called him. I guess they would talk like all the time. And you're Matthew Modine. You need all the help you could get. But he called him right when Eyes Wide Shut was started, and he's just like, "Hello," and he's just like, "What do you want?" That's how he answered the phone. Kubrick answered the phone. What do you want? Nothing. I just want to. Yeah. What? He's just like, okay. He's just like, this guy has been like a father figure to me since I was cast in this movie. And then he's just like, that was just it. Like, you just treated me like trash after that.
What if your dad was Jack Torrance? He just verbally broke my arm. What a dick.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of his more famous sayings was either you care or you don't. And I think that's just the kind of way he lived his life is you care or you don't. If you don't care, then I don't have time for you.
Do you see his I think this was also in that S's for Stanley doc, the rules that he would post everywhere? Yeah.
Yes.
It's like, if you use it, put it back. If it doesn't belong to you, don't use it. They're like,
if you break it, fix it. It was like what, 13 or 14 set of rules.
You'd expect to see that on like a grocery store stock room or something,
Or in a kindergarten.
Yeah. Exactly. But I mean, looking back on it, I wish he would have done more satire. I think that was kind of my favorite. I mean, The Shining.
I think he thought everything was set. I think he thought every film he did was satirical.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I really think he thought that.
I get that, but when he was trying to be funny, I think Dr. Strangelove is one of the funniest films ever. I think that's a unsung comedy. I mean, it's praised, it's all that, but as a comedy film, I think it's one of the best. I don't
There's
know.
also some really funny parts in Lolita. If you listen to some of the wordplay, because there's a scene where James Mason is playing chess with Shelley Winters, and Lolita walks in, and James Mason is trying to explain chess to Shelley Winters, and right when Lolita gets in the middle of them, she remarks, "Are you going to take my queen?" And there's all this funny wordplay and about cherry pies and being broad-minded and things like that.
Yeah, he was. I mean,
Well, he had to take a lot of the sexuality out of that movie to get it past censors. So
Oh
he
yes,
put in
a lot.
a lot of
And they,
Kubrick.
yeah, and they raised her age 2 years to be
Yeah.
like 16 or 17 instead of 14. So
Well, in the book, I think she was 12 when he met
Yeah.
her. It's a little, even for Russia.
it's a little suspect.
I mean, isn't Alex supposed to be 14 in A Clockwork Orange?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's rough.
14 or 15, I can't remember which.
Can we say that Kubrick's a little pervy? I mean, he does sexuality a lot.
Yeah, he does.
And not always, I don't know. Sometimes it's like with the story, but sometimes he's just showing boobs. And I'm just like,
He almost does sexuality like an asexual person, though. So like, oh, here's all that screwing everybody loves. Here you go. Got to put
And
that
it's-
screwing in there for the people.
It's borderline exploitational. I mean, it's not straight out exploitational, but usually when there is, the female form is shown, it's during something shady or seedy or a sexual assault, something like that is usually when he would show female nudity.
yeah. And a lot of it happens off camera. Thank God. Like the costume shop's owner in Eyes Wide Shut. I mean, you see this very young girl pop out of the back of a couch with some older gentleman, and it's just like, oh, thank you for showing a little bit of restraint after before the orgy scene, I guess. But,
Right.
You can still show a little restraint, so that's good at least.
Well, it's like he equates female nudity with vulnerability more than sexuality.
Okay.
I could see that, yeah.
Like that's what he's trying to convey.
Yeah, because usually when they are nude, they're in a moment of peril or danger. So
Yeah.
Or they're in a weird orgy where they're outnumbered 10-1.
that's, that too.
All bets are off when you got the Eyes Wide Shut. But yeah, I mean, I think the flip on that is The Shining with the woman in the bathtub, right? I mean,
Yeah.
she is in control the entire time, whether she be, the beautiful young siren or the hag.
Yeah, there it's used as a weapon almost.
Yeah, exactly. Oh boy, yeah. I don't know. It's tough, man. Like I said at the beginning of this, I really dug deep into this, and by the end of it, I was almost getting emotional because I felt like I lost like an uncle or something. And even by watching videos of him or just videos of people talking about him, you feel this crazy magnetic pull towards this man and what he's accomplished. And
He's House.
yeah, damn, yeah.
He's Rick Sanchez.
But you were able to dodge it. Like you came out on the other end liking him a little less, right?
I mean, his movies are good, but I just like Daniel Day-Lewis does good performances. I just don't think any of what he does to get ready to do those performances is necessary because other people don't do that and they act fine, right? Like,
You don't think the end justifies the means?
I think it's a lot of it's for show. In Kubrick's case, not really. I think he was just such a control freak. He didn't even trust the author of a novel to tell him what the story was about. He's like, no, I'm going to completely rewrite.
A couple times.
Almost
Yeah,
all of his films are novel
adaptations of
right?
novels. Yeah,
Sure.
He made profound changes on a lot of them. I mean, even AI was Pinocchio.
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, that's what he was going for. It was Pinocchio.
Mhm.
Like in a couple, like the movies that didn't get made would have been a little bit probably, you know, he wanted to make a movie about Napoleon and he wanted to make a movie about the Holocaust, and those never got made because somebody else made them. Like, he felt like he couldn't even make a movie somebody else made.
Well,
Like, he wouldn't have been the guy making Armageddon the month Deep Impact came out. He was like, nope.
Nope.
And you know why Spielberg was able to slip Schindler's List in there? Because Spielberg's like, hey, let's make a movie about the Holocaust. Bang, bang, boom. 18 months from pre-production to wrap. That's how you make a movie. And Kubrick spent 3 years doing research. So yeah, just make a movie.
So how much do you think that was bullshit? Because the whole story about that was that he got so entrenched about the Holocaust and he just couldn't take it anymore emotionally, that he just had to let it go. Do you think there was some truth to that, or do you think it was just like, yeah, Spielberg did it and he just that was enough?
I'd say it's a little of both, but more so that Spielberg told the story already.
But also, if you really dig into the Holocaust, like, it's the more you know about it, the worse you feel. So as anybody that does their due diligence like him probably read a lot of stuff he wished he hadn't.
And I know Schindler's List is still had a lasting impact. It still haunts Spielberg, you know, because I mean it was a no holds barred kind of a feature. But Kubrick, his wife, you know, went on.
That was a movie with a happy ending, and it was still Schindler's List.
Yeah.
Like, that was like, what's the happiest possible outcome? How about a dude that saves everybody? Cool. So we need a sniper shooting people in the face, and we need people being literally gassed, and in a movie with a happy ending.
Yeah.
Like, shit. There's no way Kubrick was making a Holocaust movie with a happy ending.
He didn't have any happy endings, did he? Really? Truly?
If the author wrote a happy ending, he changed it.
I mean, if you're Alex from A Clockwork Orange, right?
True.
Or you're Hembert. I guess now it's a sad ending because she's not 14 anymore. You're like,
well, then he dies in prison.
So do they. I get older, they don't stay the same age. No, they don't.
I always thought that was kind of a skeevy scene where he finally finds her after she, you know, escapes from him, and he opens the door and he doesn't see this child anymore. He sees a woman, and the look on his face is so disappointed. And I'm like, no.
You're giving him the benefit of the doubt the entire film, and then right at the end, you're like, no, yeah, he's just gross.
Yeah, no, he's just a creep. Oh gosh.
He spent so much time and so much clout in casting. He thought that was very important, which I appreciated. And then, you know, I was watching, knowing that, I was watching Barry Lyndon, and I'm like, I can't stand, I'm just going to call him Chris O'Donnell. I can't stand Chris O'Donnell. But then as the film went on and you realize that you're supposed to root against him and that Barry Lyndon is an asshole, you're like, okay, yeah, this was perfect casting also.
And I think
that's Brian O'Neill. Haven't you seen Paper Moon?
I don't know. In that, he was just Chris O'Donnell.
Answer the question. We should do Flim Flam movies next. That'd be cool.
Or he also did that a little bit with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. I mean, those two were purposefully cast in those roles because they're also a married couple, and also because of the way they look. You know, they're very beautiful, superficial Hollywood actors, and
plus you could tell their marriage was falling apart.
Yeah, right. Well, God, some of the stuff that he did to them to kind of harbor and organically grow like this jealousy between them, like the scenes where Nicole Kidman is, you know, the dream sequence where she's with is it a naval soldier or something like that?
Yeah.
That he keeps, you know, seeing in his head.
They're called seamen.
Yes, there you go. And Kubrick wouldn't let Tom Cruise on that set and told Nicole Kidman not to tell Tom Cruise what went on. And it was for like 6 hours a day, and he'd make them get in all sorts of different positions and stuff. And it's like, he knew what that was going to do. He knew exactly what that was going to do.
So why didn't these people say no? Because of who he was?
Because of who he was. Yeah. Because they signed open-ended contracts that they were going to work on this film until it was finished. And he had that presence and pull, and they're like, oh, it's Kubrick, so I got to do it.
And they knew it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work with a guy who made a film every 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, wasn't too many people that got to work with him twice unless they were on his team. And then they get
That's
to work
true.
with him every day because he worked 365 just building models and periscopes and shit.
He would have his little stable of actors in his earlier career, and then he would kind of get rid of them.
Well, that was his friends that would work for nothing, which is how you make a documentary for $1,000.
Yeah, but Kirk Douglas, he despised. He had him twice. Peter Sellers, he despised. He had him twice. Philip Stone. I love Philip Stone's progression in Stanley Kubrick films because I think he debuts in Clockwork Orange, and he's Alex's like bumbling dad. And then you go to Barry Lyndon, and he plays the role of Graham, where he's also kind of like this shy introvert, but then he kind of gets to give the last like middle finger to Barry Lyndon. And then he's just like, hey, you get to be a complete murderer for the role of Grady in The Shining, and I loved that. So I love seeing that we had a little mini game, a Philip Stone arc, which is just great.
Yeah, he's the only one that got an arc.
from just complete shill to mass murdering ghost. Perfect. Yeah, that's your Stanley Kubrick arc, your three movie arc right there. Fantastic.
Well, and Spielberg used him too.
Did he use Philip Stone? What was he?
Yeah, he was in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Oh, sure.
Oh yeah, he was the British officer. That's right.
Yeah. I don't. Man. Malcolm McDowell, man. What a role! And then what did he do after? I mean, really?
Caligula, dog.
Oh, sure.
He did Caligula.
He was in a Star Trek movie also.
He was a Tank Girl.
Yeah.
He was in Tank Girl. He does the Totes McGo. I mean, he cast Stanley Kubrick cast Darth Vader twice, right? That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
David Prowse.
Yeah, and
James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones.
Mm-hmm.
You got the voice and the body, so to speak. I don't know.
He never cast Hayden Christensen, which is also to his credit. That's outrageous.
Hayden Christensen was the baby in 2001.
Going to Earth to ruin a trilogy.
Yeah. He succeeded. Good job, Anakin.
He picked up a bone and just beat Star Wars to death.
I hate sand. It's coarse. It gets in everything.
Oh god. Yeah, and I didn't realize it. I just rewatched Eyes Wide Shut the other day, and the guy who plays the piano player, Nick the piano player, is also a director, and he directed two of some of my favorite films, In the Bedroom and Little Children. I had no idea it was that guy.
Did he direct Little Children? Wow.
Yeah. I had no idea it was that guy.
Yeah, he liked casting kind of bigger actors in like really tiny roles. Like I think Alan Cummings was the
concierge, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they went through I think what's his name? But Vitali. He was the guy that played Lord Bullion in Barry Lyndon, and then he kept him as like he's like, yeah, I'm interested in doing film. So Stanley's like, okay, cool. I keep saying Stan Lee, like our dearly departed comic guy, but Kubrick, he's just like, yeah, you want to be in the film industry, sure. Like all you had to do was ask this guy, right? And then he made him his casting director all the way through Eyes Wide Shut. But yeah, he Vitali said he went through like 200 video screenings to just cast that little concierge role, which would later become Alan Cummings. So everything was like super meticulous to a fault or to not a fault. Like you can't say that he half-assed anything, right?
No, not at all.
Jason can.
No, I don't think I think he double-assed stuff that didn't need to be double-assed, man.
He was a Sir Mix-a-Lot of directors.
Well, talking about doing it to his detriment, I think it was in Clockwork Orange where they were casting one of the nude women. I can't remember which role, and he just had a flip book of pictures of their breasts.
Oh boy!
But he realized he couldn't tell which actress the breasts belonged to because he just had pictures of their breasts to try and cast these roles. He was that meticulous. He wanted a certain pair of boobs, but then he couldn't match the pair of boobs to the face after.
No one who's ever had a binder full of women has had it turn out well for them.
Oh, God.
Kind of looks like a gentleman that would have a binder full of boobs. Oh, boy. You guys kind of talked me out of it. More Jason than Lindsay, but...
Look, man, I don't dislike Kubrick. He's the Daniel Day-Lewis of directors. Where it's sort of like...
Take that back.
It's like, yeah, you did a great job, but you put in 3 times as much effort as was probably necessary. Because other people are good directors too, and they don't do what you did.
I don't think he cared, though. I think that was more he did it for himself.
And I don't think he could have done it another way.
No, exactly, yeah.
Who would have made The Shining better?
Oh, gosh.
Which director?
Yeah.
Of that time, or just any director?
Give any. Today, modern or past?
Oh, God, that's a hard question.
But like the Shining isn't The Shining; it's Kubrick's The Shining. So like
that's true.
It's the movie it is because he didn't care what the book said.
Yeah,
so
he formed it into what he wanted it to be.
Define better. Would a scarier Shining, or a more true to the book Shining, or like a better looking The Shining? Or
okay, so Stephen King's adaptations have been going on forever. Who could have made The Shining a classic like Kubrick did?
Darabont, I don't know.
Yeah, The Mist was pretty sweet.
Because I mean, they did the TV movie version, which was okay, and Stephen King seemed to like that interpretation of it. Yeah, because it was his vision. But I don't think anyone could have taken that book and made what Stanley Kubrick did, except for Stanley Kubrick.
I could make a Stephen King adaptation of The Dark Tower as long as I'm like faithful to the book, and Stephen King will sign off on it. Mm-hmm. He just likes his own stuff being portrayed like his own stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's so like meandering, and I mean, and that's the thing that's so funny is those two didn't get along because they are synonymous. I mean, Stephen King is the Stanley Kubrick. You know, one's an author, one's a filmmaker, but that's what they do. They make you sit down and take the time to analyze wardrobe and lighting and costume and theme and tone. And
Stephen King puts out 2 1,200-page books a year.
That's true.
I don't think Kubrick ever had a Coke problem either.
I don't think Stephen King had a Coke problem. He had a I need to write 1,200 pages problem.
Have you read it? It's pretty cokey.
Look, so he had a 12-year-old kid gangbang scene.
And a turtle god.
Yeah. Who hasn't written a 12-year-old gangbang scene cast the first stone?
You might need a little nose powder.
Yeah. I don't remember writing it. Yeah, I would say that too if I wrote a 12-year-old gangbang scene.
And it also gave us his Coke habit also brought us the film adaptation of Maximum Overdrive. So
and one of my favorite, Christine.
Yeah, you like Christine more than I did.
You hated Christine.
I mean, I don't know. It's because it was the wormy kid from Back to School. That's what it was.
Must have been.
Now, Back to School, now there's a good movie.
Hey, did we almost got through an episode of this, Jason, without talking about Deuce Bigalow. oh, wait. Sorry.
Oops.
Yeah. You can't say we didn't talk about Deuce Bigalow. Like, you know what happens when you say we didn't talk about Deuce Bigalow. You did that on purpose.
We talked about Barry Lyndon, which is...
I almost brought up Boingo Boingo, which is very similar sounding to Deuce Bigalow. Boingo Boingo was in Back to School. Can we just talk about Rodney Dangerfield for the rest of this episode? Like, I think we said all we need to say about Stanley Kubrick. I didn't read a book for pleasure till I was 19.
Even in hell, I get no respect.
If chess had any relationship to filmmaking, it would be the way it helps you develop patience and discipline in choosing between alternatives at a time when an impulsive decision seems very attractive.
I think Stanley Kubrick movies are for a certain mood. Like we all have those moods where we just don't want to do anything. Well,
That's why 2001 took off.
Yeah.
All of his movies were critical failures basically until 2001, which was still a critical failure. But then teenage boys like my dad went and saw it, and then stoner culture caught up with it. And they're like, oh, it's a psychedelic trip. And when you look at it as a psychedelic trip movie, a lot of that dumb symbolism actually seems cool. That shit seems profound when you're on acid. And you're like, oh, I get it. The monkeys are afraid to walk to the desert, just like the humans are afraid to do a spacewalk in space. Oh, I get it. The bone is a spaceship because it's a primitive tool that helps them go beyond their frontier they were initially scared of. But then, like, you're on acid and you're like, oh, I thought of that.
Yeah, I definitely would say that Kubrick films aren't ones that you just pop in on a Sunday. They don't have high rewatchability, as far as some other more popular films, but I think they're definitely films that should be seen at least once.
Yeah. If you're interested in film, making film, or interested in talking about film, I mean, it's almost like a must, right? You have to check that box to kind of know about what film is, because he is the box that you check, right?
Right. It's like if you want to be a writer, you have to read Vonnegut.
Yeah.
And he was so good technically.
Yes.
Like the fact that he was so meticulous and the fact that everything mattered to him, there was no better director technically at the time. And everything took forever, and he didn't want anybody's help. He's like, hey, if craft services throws away 50 plates, that means there's too many people and we got to start firing some people. Like, he wanted a small set. He didn't want anybody mucking with stuff. He didn't even want stand-ins on his set. So when you're that painstaking, you're going to get a good product.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't argue with his results. You can't argue with how all of his films look. If he wants you to be unsettled, you're going to be unsettled. If he wants you to feel sort of odd that everything seems cold and antiseptic, like, he will frame a scene that way. Like, he knew how to frame and light and shoot everything to evoke the exact emotion he was going for. Technically, the man was a genius. He's a genius the way House is a genius, where he's just, I don't know, like, I got a guy to admit that he cheated on his wife in the first half of the episode, but it turned out that didn't even matter. Wah, wah. Like, was it necessary to make her cry for 12 hours a day for 6 months? Yeah, because it took us 6 months to shoot a 3-second scene. So yeah, like, I mean, yeah, he got the results. He was, the stuff that he did looks fantastic, and I wish he'd made more movies, but he couldn't.
Do you think the movies themselves stand alone to speak for, his talent and kind of the legend that is Stanley Kubrick, or do you think that all the behind the scenes stuff and his personality are what really pushed it into overdrive?
I think I think if all I knew about him was his movies, I would like him more.
Yeah.
I feel like the more I found out about him, the more I'm like, Jesus. It's like The Shining's a pretty good movie. The Shining took 11 years. Oh, come on.
It's like anyone could have made a masterpiece in 11 years, right?
Steven Spielberg was burning $1.2 million a day waiting for him to clear out so he could. They shot the Raiders of the Lost Ark scene where he has like the staff and it's going on that room was the room from The Shining. And Spielberg was waiting for him to clear that lot. And he was like, just a few more days. So like he delayed other movies and Spielberg, if I'd have been Spielberg, I'd be like, I hate that guy. But Spielberg's like, he's my friend.
He was eating it up. Spielberg loved
Spielberg said I was his friend. I got to come to his house. I was just like, if I'd have been Spielberg, we're like, this dick has been shooting this 4-second scene of a tricycle for 3 weeks. Get off my set. Get off my set. Get off my set.
Didn't the set burn down at one point also, and they had to rebuild everything?
Yeah.
Like,
took another year. Yeah.
Because he fired the fire extinguisher guy. He's like, yeah, we don't need 51 plates. Take a hike.
Here's kind of a piggyback statement off of what Lindsay said, but think about this. What other filmmaker has the staying power of Stanley Kubrick. Like his 2001, the effects in 2001 made in 1968 looks incredible today. What other direct, and that's only because he was such a nut job that he took meticulous time to do that. You could watch almost any of his movies, save for the real early stuff, but like almost any of his movies today and be like, this basically holds up to today's standards.
Yes. And I think the biggest way that he accomplished that is each one of them existed inside their own world. And I mean, a lot of them, almost existed inside a dream world, especially like Eyes Wide Shut, where they reconstructed New York City, but they didn't want it to look exactly like New York City. It was like this dream world almost.
Yep. If he just used an editor, that would have been great. He's the reverse. Like all the filmmakers, all the great filmmakers, you want to see their director's cuts, right? It's the name of the show. You want to see the extended versions. What Zack Snyder can't. He puts out literally a burp, and then he's just like, wait a year, and you'll get the whole movie. It's like, God, really? But Kubrick's kind of the reverse of that. It's like if Barry Lyndon was like a crisp 2 hours, even a $1.45, great. Masterpiece. Probably watch it
still
again.
A good movie because there's so much time of like 3-minute shots until you're like, all right, you're looking at your watch like, cool, so they're just gonna stare at this harpsichord then. All right, cool. And why is this 2.5 minutes? Yeah, an editor could have gotten that down to a nice brisk 2 hours real easy. But film is a visual medium, so the narrative aspect is what moves you from scene to scene. They're moving pictures, right? That's what he thought. He was a photographer primarily, so everything was a moving photograph to him, which is why the mise en scène was so important to him. That's why everything in Barry Lyndon looked like it was a Renaissance painting. Yeah. So yeah, he's like, well, if I'm going to have a moving picture, I want to... See, okay, I got some quotes from Spielberg because Spielberg liked him. So the Kubrick stare, right? The 1 point, the single point. What do I call it? The 1 point perspective, where it's like the dot in the back, and then all the lines lead to it. So it makes everything look. It gives everything depth, and when he's not using a wide lens to make everything look like a painting, he does that a lot. You can see supercuts of every 1 point perspective shot, just all stacked up on each other, and it's really interesting. But he didn't always do that. He had a lot of symmetrical shots, a lot of that kind of tunnel vision type shots, but there were some times where he would deliberately not set it up like that. And that's because he wanted you to figure out what to look at. When he wanted you to look at something or feel a certain way, he's like, all right, here's the tunnel. There's where you're looking at. There's where you focus. There's the 1 point of perspective. Boom. But Spielberg says, what do you learn? Here's a quote. I learned from Stanley technically was how to shoot things and master how to trust the audience to be the film editor sometimes, and how to trust the audience to decide who they want to look at and when. So that was something he did well when he wasn't forcing you to look at what he wanted you to look at. He would also put where there's no focal point. And that's why some of the stuff holds up, because you can watch it a second if you want to watch a 3-hour movie again.
Yeah, you always discover new things. And he always, especially in like Eyes Wide Shut and his later couple of films, he would place things in the background that were, nods to his earlier films. I think the one that jumped out at me this last time that I watched Eyes Wide Shut was there was a Beethoven bust in the coffee shop up on the wall from Clockwork Orange.
Which doesn't even belong there.
No, it doesn't. Not at all.
And you got he went really ham-fisted with the 2001 Space Odyssey.
Yes.
In A Clockwork Orange in the record store. But I mean, wouldn't if 2001 was edited down, it could have been, I think, and some people think it was, like your dad thinks it is, but I think that the general audience, and I get, again, who gives a shit about the general audience? I get, Stanley Kubrick definitely did it, but if it was edited down and crisper, it could have gone down as Star Wars. It could have gone down as Star Trek. It could have been the greatest sci-fi of all time.
I don't think a shorter movie would have done it.
Really?
I don't think there's anything you could have cut out of 2001 to make it more accessible. I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that's
Star
true.
Wars and Star Trek and Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers had adventure, right? It was the hero's journey in space. This wasn't that.
No, where those movies are more driven by the narrative and the action, and 2001 is more driven by emotion and feeling and the visuals that you're seeing.
Did I say Asimov wrote the book an hour ago? It was Arthur C. Clarke.
Arthur C. Clarke, yeah.
Yeah.
But going back to what you were saying about how he learned to trust the audience of where to look and things like that, it kind of pairs with how he would hate to explain the meaning behind his films or the meanings behind certain scenes. And I don't know if that's just because he hated talking about it or because he wanted people to make up their own minds.
But I think some of the time it was he didn't trust the audience to get basic symbolism. Like, one of the reasons I hate The Departed so much is, like, The Departed's a good movie until the end, and then you see, like, the Capitol building, and you're like, oh, that's a Capitol building he's been staring at his whole life. He aspired to that, like, and this is how his life ends. It's come full circle, and then the rat runs across the railing while you're having that thought. You're like, you think I'm an asshole, don't you? You think I'm the stupidest idiot in the goddamn world that you had to put the rat on the railing. You must think I suck. Here I was appreciating, and you're like, yeah, also he was a rat. Just give me some credit. Like, I realize I paid $11 to see a movie and I paid $14 for popcorn, but can you just give me some credit and tell me you don't think I'm an asshole?
I think Kubrick did it as the latter of what Lindsay you said. I think he was more, he wanted just the audience to say it. I think he had his own idea, of course, about the meaning of it, but he didn't want to explain it. He kind of wanted you to kind of...
He wanted to show, not tell.
Exactly. Yeah, I think he put all of his meaning into the film itself, and he didn't feel like he needed to explain himself more, because for him, he explained it through the film.
Yep. And it's art, right? Art is interpretive. I think one of the last movies, even though I'm not the biggest fan of this film, but the last movie to do that is like Inception, where it's kind of open, but that's not what general audiences like and crave, and that's what that's not what sells tickets anymore. So
no, because movies make them the mistake of going to a focus group.
Yeah,
like I didn't like that the ending was sad, and so like focus groups destroy movies. Kubrick wouldn't have stood for the studio being like, hey, so we went to a focus group and they think the ending of your movie's too sad. Is there any way you could make it so Alex delivers ice cream to people that were injured in the Vietnam War instead of beating people with canes? Is there any way you could do that?
Well, that brings up a good point. With all that kind of stuff going on today in studio meddling, do you think a Kubrick could come to the forefront again in film?
I don't think so. He put
no way.
The first time Vincent D'Onofrio was on the set of Full Metal Jacket, he met Stanley Kubrick in a van full of people, and Kubrick got out of the van. They started walking to where they were shooting, and Vincent D'Onofrio kind of looks back. He says, "Are those guys coming with us?" He said, "No, that's the Warner Brother execs. That's where they go. They're not allowed on my set."
They're not allowed on my set. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were like in a van with binoculars trying to see what he was up to. He's like, "You can't come any closer." Now Warner Brothers is like, we had creative differences. Zack Snyder's going to finish Full Metal Jacket. That's what they did. Seriously.
Yeah.
They're not going to put up with his bullshit. So like, Hollywood doesn't want a movie not to make money anymore. And so Hollywood's learning all the wrong lessons from movies that are successful. And when something does hit, they're like, it needs 96 sequels.
That's true.
Paranormal Activity made money. I think the salient aspect of that movie is the fact that it was a found footage movie about ghosts. So let's do that 11 times. They did. I don't know. A sequel feels guaranteed to them, so they're not going to put up with, a studio's not going to risk $60 million because no one gave Kubrick the 1976 equivalent of $80 million to make a movie and then spend another $40 million on advertising. So like the movie's got to make $150 million to like break even. Like they didn't do that back then. So of course you could be like, Kubrick's just got the gravitas just from like Spartacus that we can give him a little bit of, and he did all the pre-production stuff himself. He footed the bill. He did all the stuff. It's ready to go. Let's just let him do it.
He was a great producer. He was a very underrated producer. He was so good with the finances and funding that's like you said, that's why that started.
Originally, he's like, wow, if we can get $40,000 for this documentary and make it for $5, we're gonna be rich.
Yep.
Those beginnings. I'm so glad I stumbled across that interview because that told me everything I really needed to know about him, and the fact he's like, we could save money doing this ourselves. So yeah, as much as the studio's like, we want to know what he's up to, it's also like, we only gave him, $3 million.
What's the worst that could happen? It's gonna bomb.
Yeah.
Oh well. Yeah, it's all right. Well, we're kind of up against it. That is any departing thoughts on closing this up about the late great Stanley Kubrick, Lindsay?
I'd say he's the kind of filmmaker where even people that have not seen his films know who he is, and it's invaded the pop culture enough. They know references, they know each one of the films, and it's hard to find another director that is now gone and that made such few films that have that kind of impact. Absolutely.
Jason?
I don't want it to sound like I don't like Kubrick or his movies. I do, but I also I want to be the devil's advocate, and when somebody needed to go, come on, I was willing to be that guy. Kubrick's great. His movies are great. Come on.
According to Jason, he is the Daniel Day-Lewis.
The Daniel Day-Lewis directors.
Yeah, he is in my opinion, the Stephen King. I mean, like I said before, if you like film, you want to talk about film, interested in making film, it's a must. Stanley Kubrick is the one that created the box to check because of that's obsession. That is someone that is obsessed with the craft. This is no Michael Bay. This is no, I don't know. I mean, this is almost like in watching Kubrick a little bit, it kind of reminded me of Michael Mann, where he wouldn't do sequels or anything because they just got so obsessed with the subject matter. Even Michael Mann got obsessed with Black Hat, the subject matter of that, even though it was a shit movie. There's something to be said about just being that passionate about the subject matter, to the point where Stanley Kubrick got, where he was so obsessed with Napoleon, so obsessed with the Holocaust, that he just had to step away from it because he felt like he couldn't do it justice. And that's saying more about him than some of the films that he did put on the screen. But I want to thank, of course, my co-host, Jason Alt. Where can everyone find you?
I'm on Twitter at Jason E. Alt. I write a few articles on the internet, but hey, if you just find me on Twitter, you'll get cross-referenced to everything else. You'll figure it out. Thanks so much for watching.
That's right. And thank you so much. Special guest, Lindsay Washburn, actress, model, Crohn's disease activist. Where can everyone find you?
Twitter's probably the best place, at Lindsay Washburn, and it's Lindsay with an A. So that's probably the best place to find me.
Not gonna lie, that was a son of a bitch for a while. But I figured it out.
I would assume Lindsay had an I.
I was doing E-I-I-E, everything but A. And I was like, what is happening? I know she exists. But yes, thank you for clearing that up. You can find me right here on this very channel. You can also find me on Twitter at OrzovDone, Reddit, all the stuff, whatever. We will see you guys next time at the movies.